You wake up. It's 6 a.m. The baby was up at 2 and at 4. And somewhere around 5, you stopped counting. You haven't eaten a real meal in 3 days. You haven't slept a full night in longer than you can remember. Your body hurts in places you didn't know could hurt. And today is the same as yesterday. And tomorrow will be the same as today. Now strip all of it away. No hospital where the baby was born. No formula when the milk runs dry. No pediatrician. No fever reducer. No emergency room at 3 a.m. when something sounds wrong and you don't know why. Just you, a child, a fire, and something in the dark. Something real. Something close that is actively deciding whether your child is worth the effort of hunting. No app for that either. And here's the question nobody thinks to ask. Did they actually care? Not sentimentally, not philosophically, forensically. What does the physical evidence, the bones, the burial sites, the archaeology actually tell us about how ancient humans treated their most vulnerable members? Because the answer is not what you expect, and it is not comfortable. The assumption most people carry without ever examining it is that prehistoric parenting was brutal and transactional. You kept the strong children, you abandoned the weak ones. Survival of the fittest operating at the family level, cold, efficient, unsentimental. It is a reasonable assumption. It is almost completely wrong. Let's look at what the ground actually gives us, because the ground does not lie. In 2009, researchers analyzing fossils from Atapuerca in northern Spain identified the skeletal remains of a child. The child had lived to approximately 8 years old. The child had craniosynostosis, a congenital condition in which the skull bones fuse prematurely, causing cognitive impairment, developmental delays, and significant physical difference from birth. This child required sustained, specialized care from infancy, not passive care, active, attentive, daily investment in a child who by any purely survival-based logic should not have been prioritized. The fossils date to approximately 500,000 years ago, 500,000 years ago. Someone looked at a child who would never contribute to the group's survival in any conventional sense, and kept going every single day for 8 years. And this was not an adult who had earned social capital over decades, not a hunter who had proved his value to the group, a child from birth, with no utility to offer and no future contribution to promise. Let that land. And it does not stop at children. In 1957, in a cave called Shanidar in northern Iraq, archaeologists uncovered the skeletal remains of a Neanderthal male. They called him Shanidar 1. He was approximately 40 to 50 years old at the time of his death. For a Neanderthal, that is genuinely old. Here is what his skeleton showed. His right arm had been so severely damaged, likely from birth or early childhood, that it had atrophied completely. Useless. His right eye socket showed damage consistent with partial or complete blindness on that side. Severe arthritis throughout his body. Multiple healed fractures indicating a life of repeated serious injury. This individual could not hunt, could not gather at full capacity. He was, by every metric that should have mattered, the last person a group of prehistoric humans needed on the payroll. He lived to between 40 and 50 years old. Someone fed him. Someone kept him warm. Someone made the daily decision, for decades, that this individual's life was worth sustaining. Not because they had to. Not because he was useful, not because any authority told them to, because they chose to. The pattern is not an anomaly, it is the record, across children, across adults, across species. The same conclusion keeps emerging from the ground. But here's where it stops being remarkable and starts being forensically strange, because it is not just the survival of vulnerable individuals that the archaeology shows us. It is what ancient humans did when those individuals died. At a site in the Caucasus Mountains, researchers found the burial of an infant dating to approximately 40,000 years ago. The child had been placed in a grave with ochre, a red pigment that required real effort to source and prepare. Around the body, perforated shells, beads, objects that served zero survival function. Nobody needed beads to survive. Nobody was eating the ochre. Here's the thing nobody tells you about that burial. Digging a grave with stone tools is hard. It takes time. It takes energy. Energy that a group operating on thin survival margins did not have to spare. They spent it anyway. Not on a hunter, not on a provider, on an infant who had contributed nothing to the group's survival and never would. Nah, this is not an isolated case. Across dozens of sites, across multiple continents, the burial of children with intentional grave goods appears again and again across the archaeological record. Europe, Africa, the Middle East. Groups with no contact with each other, separated by thousands of miles and tens of thousands of years, say independently arriving at the same conclusion, that the death of a child demanded something, cost something, meant something. Grief is not a modern invention, it has a fossil record. And that record is ancient, consistent, and ruthlessly specific about what ancient humans considered worth mourning. Now, here is the piece that most people have never heard of. And it is the hardest evidence to argue with. In the late 1980s, researchers studying skeletal remains from multiple prehistoric sites began documenting something unexpected in the children's bones, specifically evidence of healed fractures. Not the fracture, the healing. A broken bone in a child. In a prehistoric context, without intervention, does not heal cleanly, without immobilization, without consistent protection, without someone making sure that child stays still for weeks. It heals badly. Infection follows. The child dies. A cleanly healed fracture in a prehistoric child's skeleton is not an accident. It is a record of a decision. Someone immobilized that limb. Someone kept that child fed and warm and protected while they could not move. Someone absorbed the full cost of that care, the time, the energy, the resources, for as long as it took. We are not talking about one site, multiple sites, multiple continents, hundreds of thousands of years. Ancient humans were splinting broken bones in their children before anyone had a word for medicine, before anyone wrote down instructions. They worked it out. And they did it consistently across the entire archaeological record. That is not instinct. That is knowledge. Deliberately applied, passed down, generation after generation after generation. Now, to be fair about what the evidence actually tells us, archaeology cannot excavate emotions. We cannot dig up love. Bones do not tell us what people felt. They tell us what people did. What they did is sustained care under conditions of genuine scarcity. What they did is spend irreplaceable energy burying infants with objects that had no survival value. What they did is immobilize injured children for weeks at a cost the group could barely afford. You can call that instinct if you want. You can call it social bonding strategy. You can call it evolutionary investment in genetic continuation. But it is difficult, genuinely difficult, to look at the full body of that evidence and explain it without something that functioned, at minimum, very much like love. Here's what all of this adds up to. For most of human history, a child did not belong to two people. A child belonged to an entire group. Parents, grandparents, siblings, cousins, unrelated adults, all of them involved, all of them invested, all of them watching. A child was rarely alone. A parent was rarely without support. Today, we have more parenting books than any civilization in history, more child psychology research, more expert advice and support infrastructure than at any point in 300,000 years of human existence. And the average parent is expected to do the same job with two adults, one apartment, and an exhaustion level that would genuinely concern a Neanderthal. We have built an entire industry around the question of how to raise a child well. We have built a separate set of institutions around what happens when the answer is not well enough. Ancient humans did not build those second institutions, not because they were more virtuous, not because they were better people, because the forensic record, the bones, the burials, the healed fractures, suggests that when care was the default, embedded in every member of the group, distributed across an entire community rather than concentrated in two exhausted people in a closed apartment, failure was rarer, not absent, rarer. And the question worth sitting with, the one the archaeology leaves you with, is not whether ancient humans loved their children. The evidence is clear on that. The question is what it means that we built an entire civilization, stripped out the communal structure that made that care sustainable, handed the whole job to 2 people, surrounded them with expert advice on how to do it correctly, and then built institutions for when they couldn't.